we were going to war again based on a lie. And it was just very, very disturbing. And there's a line in the film where James Marsden, who plays Warren Strobel, he says, it feels like you feel like your child is running into the street.
They stood under the same lights, on the same set, sharing the same wave of success that swept through living rooms across America. Carroll O'Connor and Rob Reiner looked like the perfect mix on All in the Family, the fire and the calm that made TV history. But behind that laughter, something much darker was boiling. They didn't just disagree, they could barely stand each other. The tension got so heavy that the crew could feel it in the air. Arguments broke out, words got sharp, and soon things hit a breaking point so bad that filming had to stop.
And as a parent, you're helpless to save him from being hit by the truck. And that's the way I felt about it. As we marched to war, I thought, this is crazy. I mean, we knew there was no connection between Saddam Hussein and Osama bin Laden. We knew there was no way that those aluminum tubes could enhance yellow cake.
The chaos got so bad that the show's creator had to jump in just to keep the whole production from falling apart. Now let's break down what really went down behind those cameras, because once you find out what was going on, you'll be shocked at how much hate was hiding right there in plain sight. It all started when Rob Reiner crossed a line, one that Carroll O'Connor would never forget. People always thought these two were tight, good friends, trusted co-stars who lifted each other up through the grind of showbiz. But that idea? Totally false. Way before the audience sensed anything, the two men had already become straight-up enemies. By the time All in the Family hit TV screens in January 1971, Carroll O'Connor was already a powerhouse actor, decades deep into film, stage, and television. For him, every movement mattered, every word had purpose. Acting, to him, wasn't politics, it was pure craft, pure interpretation.
America being the last remaining superpower, what would they do with this power in terms of spreading democracy? And they had talked about going into Iraq in the Middle East and figuring out a way to put a Western-style democracy in the Middle East. Hopefully it would proliferate and then, help Israel and spread democracy.
Rob Reiner, though, came in swinging from a completely different angle. Younger, loud with his political views, and shaped by the wild energy of the late 60s, Reiner didn't see the show as just comedy. It was his weapon of change. To him, All in the Family wasn't just entertainment, it was a statement. His character, Michael Meathead Stivic, wasn't just Archie Bunker's son-in-law, he was a symbol, and that made the clash between them explode even harder. Michael Meathead Stivic was written to be Archie Bunker's total opposite, the young idealist against the old-school, stubborn father figure. But the real-life tension between Rob Reiner and Carroll O'Connor hit long before the cameras ever rolled.
When he was stuck creatively, he would come into the room, in my room in the house, and he would say, "Has anything interesting happened to you lately?" So I knew he was stuck, he was looking for something to do. But I grew up.
During early rehearsals, O'Connor spotted something that instantly set off alarms. Reiner didn't wait for direction. He'd cut into table reads, interrupt others mid-line, and challenge how scenes should be delivered. This wasn't teamwork, it was open combat. Rehearsals turned into battle zones. Reiner would stop everything to argue about how a scene should feel, insisting Archie always had to be clearly wrong, never complex, never humanized. O'Connor couldn't believe what he was hearing. To him, Reiner wasn't collaborating, he was controlling. O'Connor would freeze mid-rehearsal, lock eyes with Reiner, and flat-out refuse to move forward until the room calmed down. The message was loud and clear: you don't run this set. From that moment, something cold and permanent settled between them. Later, O'Connor described it without sugarcoating it. Reiner didn't behave like a co-star, he acted like a judge. In O'Connor's mind, Reiner couldn't separate the script from real life. He wasn't arguing with the character Archie Bunker, he was arguing at Carroll O'Connor himself. And that personal hit, O'Connor never let it go. For 7 long years, that quiet rage lived behind America's favorite sitcom. As All in the Family shot to the top of the ratings, Norman Lear, the show's creator, saw the storm growing instead of fading. Lear later admitted that the ideological war at the core of the series didn't stay on paper, it bled straight into real life. The feud didn't stay hidden, it followed Carroll O'Connor and Rob Reiner everywhere. It crept onto the soundstage, into rehearsals, and even froze production more than once. Gene Stapleton, who played the sweet and patient Edith Bunker, quietly admitted that the tension between them was uncomfortable, though just barely under control. She saw it all, how O'Connor would lean back whenever Reiner spoke off script, arms crossed, eyes turned away. Every move screamed defiance. These weren't random habits, they were silent protests. O'Connor was icing Reiner out right in front of everyone. But Reiner, he wasn't backing off for a second. He kept challenging scenes, pushing harder each time, claiming that the scripts were too soft on Archie's bigotry. In Reiner's mind, Archie Bunker had to be called out, corrected, and defeated every single episode. He wanted the message to be crystal clear. O'Connor, on the other hand, wasn't having it. He believed Archie's strength as a character came from being real, not ridiculed. To him, the magic of the show was that people recognized Archie. They saw their uncle, their neighbor, even parts of themselves. So when Reiner interrupted yet another scene to question his delivery, O'Connor had enough. He froze mid-line, turned his head toward Norman Lear, and said absolutely nothing. That silence, it was louder than shouting. Everyone on set went still. The crew, the cast, even the cameras kept rolling while the air turned thick with tension. Lear later admitted that moment was the breaking point. He had to step in just to restore order. Without saying a single word, O'Connor had drawn his line in stone. He felt cornered by Reiner's constant ideological pressure, like he was being judged instead of respected. While Reiner saw his pushback as standing for moral truth, O'Connor felt it as a personal attack, as if Reiner wasn't acting with him, acting against him. And that personal feeling never left Carroll O'Connor, not for a single day. Years later, he opened up about it in one of his most quoted lines, saying, "Rob always thought he was smarter than everyone else." That wasn't just a jab, it was O'Connor's full diagnosis of what he believed was Reiner's biggest flaw. In O'Connor's eyes, Reiner didn't truly respect the art of acting. He twisted it, used it like a weapon. And for O'Connor, that was something he could never forgive. What made things worse was how the outside world seemed to feed Reiner's fire. Critics constantly praised his character, Michael Meathead Stivic, calling him the voice of reason, while Archie Bunker was labeled the roadblock to progress. O'Connor read every one of those reviews, and they hit him hard. He couldn't shake the feeling that Reiner wasn't just winning debates in front of the cameras, he was winning in real life. To O'Connor, those glowing headlines weren't celebrating balance, they were stripping his character of humanity. Behind closed doors, O'Connor eventually hit his limit. In an interview later in life, he didn't hold back for a second. He said flatly, "I've worked with many people I couldn't stand, but Rob topped them all." That line ended any illusion of peace between them. But here's the twist, the cruel irony of it all. All in the Family became iconic precisely because that conflict was real. The father and son-in-law battles that millions laughed at every week, they weren't just good writing, they were real sparks flying. The anger you saw on screen had weight because it wasn't scripted, it was lived. The audience laughed, the critics cheered, and the network cashed in. But behind those studio lights stood 2 men who could barely share the same air. And when the applause finally died and the cameras went dark, the real question wasn't if the conflict was real, it was how deep it truly ran. The real question wasn't whether the feud was real, it was whether it could survive without an audience. And the answer came fast. It absolutely did. When All in the Family wrapped in 1979, people at CBS quietly hoped that once the camera stopped rolling, the tension between Carroll O'Connor and Rob Reiner would fade away. But it didn't. The feud didn't disappear, it just lost its spotlight. O'Connor moved straight into the spin-off Archie Bunker's Place, carrying the character forward but leaving Reiner completely out of the picture. And something changed. He seemed lighter, more relaxed, almost like a weight had been lifted. Gene Stapleton even mentioned privately that O'Connor's whole energy was calmer once Reiner was gone. But every time Reiner's name came up, O'Connor's tone would tighten instantly. That resentment hadn't vanished, it had simply settled deep. By the early 1980s, the two men were living in completely different Hollywood universes. O'Connor dove into serious dramatic roles, eventually reshaping his image with In the Heat of the Night in 1988. Meanwhile, Reiner was rising fast behind the camera, turning into one of the most respected directors of his generation, with hits like This Is Spinal Tap, 1984, and Stand By Me, 1986. Their careers took off in opposite directions, but the bitterness never let go. O'Connor carried it quietly for years, and in interviews throughout the 80s and 90s, he never softened his stance. He refused to let anyone downplay what happened between them. Whenever reporters tried to label it creative differences, O'Connor shut that down immediately. He said that phrase made it sound mild, when to him it had been sustained warfare. To Carroll O'Connor, it had always been about one thing: personal disrespect. But Rob Reiner, he stayed almost completely silent. He never clapped back, never tried to change the story, and never sought to smooth things over. People close to him said that silence was intentional. He had already moved on, both professionally and emotionally. The two men never shared a stage again, never exchanged public praise, and never gave the world any sign of closure. The feud didn't burn out, it just froze in time, locked in silence forever. When O'Connor passed away on June 21, 2001, at 76 years old, Hollywood came to a standstill. TV networks filled the air with reruns of All in the Family. Critics revisited Archie Bunker's complicated legacy, and colleagues shared heartfelt memories about O'Connor's sharp mind, unshakable discipline, and deep moral sense. The industry mourned one of television's biggest legends. But through all that noise, one voice stayed quiet: Rob Reiner's. He didn't step forward with a grand tribute or attempt to rewrite their story. There was no dramatic statement, no reflection on their volatile years together, just a simple acknowledgement of O'Connor's place in TV history. Reiner gave him professional respect, nothing more. And that restraint spoke volumes. Reiner never tried to rewrite the past or defend himself. He let O'Connor's harsh words remain untouched, standing as they had for decades, bitter, final, and unresolved. By the time O'Connor's life came to an end, he had already faced deep personal tragedy, but even then, that old wound between them and Reiner never found peace. It lingered, just like the shadow of All in the Family, a reminder that some conflicts don't fade away, they just stay frozen in time. The most devastating chapter in Carroll O'Connor's life came in 1995, when his son Hugh tragically took his own life. That heartbreak completely reshaped O'Connor's world. It pushed him towards advocacy, empathy, and a deeper compassion that defined his later years. But even through that pain, there was one thing he never touched again: his feelings towards Rob Reiner. The silence between them didn't just linger, it solidified into something permanent. Reiner kept moving forward, building his career with new successes, while rarely, if ever, mentioning O'Connor again. And O'Connor, he left behind a legacy that spoke for itself. He had said exactly what he meant while he was alive, and he never took a single word back. In the end, the most haunting truth of all is this: some conflicts never find closure. They don't fade away or fix themselves, they simply outlive the people who carried them. That heavy silence became the final chapter of their story, the ending no script could rewrite. So now the question that still hangs in the air: was Carroll O'Connor fighting for artistic integrity, or did personal pride twist a creative clash into a lifelong grudge? And what about Rob Reiner? Was his silence a mark of dignity or just plain avoidance? Tell us what you think in the comments. Was this a battle of beliefs or a war of egos? If stories like this expose sides of Hollywood you've never seen before, make sure to like, subscribe, share, and drop your thoughts below, because the truth behind the spotlight is always louder than the applause.